Good afternoon. My name is Flora House, and I serve as the AARP California Executive Council member. Welcome to everyone who is joining us live. Today we are here with special guest Dr. Patrick Arbore. He is the founder and director of the Center for Elderly Suicide Prevention and Grief-Related Services at the Institute on Aging in San Francisco and the founder of the Friendship Line to discuss how to combat social isolation and loneliness during these times, as well as available resources. We encourage you to share this stream now on your own social media page, so interested friends and family may also participate in today's conversation. Also, please feel free to ask questions you may have for Dr. Bohr in the comment box. We will answer a few questions live toward the end of today's conversation. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works on behalf of 38 million members nationally and 3.3 million members statewide to enhance the quality of life for all people as we age, which includes providing important information to support and protect both our physical and mental health. To that end, AARP is thrilled to have Dr. Arbore here with us today to talk about the work he is doing to help support those who are socially isolated or feel lonely. Hi, Dr. Arbore, and welcome.
Thank you, Flora. It's good to see and hear you.
Yes. Dr. Arbore, can you tell us about the Institute on Aging and your work there?
Institute on Aging has been a part of the San Francisco city and county landscape for approximately 40 years. And actually, when I began Friendship Line, this will be starting in 2021, our 48th year of operation. So we were a small nonprofit that began in 1973, and we merged with Institute on Aging in January 1997. So we were 22 years as a separate organization, and then 25 years we've been with Institute on Aging. And Institute on Aging's mission is what attracted us when we were looking to merge with another organization, was the respect for the dignity of older adults, and also a commitment to help older people, live their lives as fully as possible, with the support of not only Institute on Aging, but our other partnering agencies throughout the city and county of San Francisco, and Friendship Line, as Flora, has grown significantly since 1973, when I would have 100 calls from clients in a month. I thought that was a big deal when I was the only one answering the phone. And we've certainly grown since then.
Well, you certainly have a long and established record. So can you explain a little bit more about what Friendship Line is specifically? What types of calls are received and who answers these calls?
Well, when we began Friendship Line, the bedrock was, I believe, that if we could decrease loneliness and social isolation, we could really have an impact on decreasing depression and suicide. And I believe back then that the most important thing that we could do would be to really make connections with people. And I believe connections are what bind us to life. And so over the years, we've expanded our net. And not only are we in the 58 counties, thanks to a partnership with the State Department of Aging, but we also receive calls from outside the state as well. But most of the people with whom we speak are people that are lonely, isolated, older adults who are experiencing depression or anxiety, especially during these crazy times. And so now we're receiving and also making calls, and each day that number is around 800 to 1,000.
That's quite a significant impact on our population, and that's great. As we enter this holiday season, which is going to look very different this year, what suggestions do you have for folks who are socially isolated or feeling lonely? And can you touch on the difference between the two, between social isolation and loneliness?
Absolutely. And, when people are feeling lonely, it has to do with a perception that I am not experiencing enough interaction with people, and that's why Friendship Light tries to fill that void. And then social isolation has to do with actually the number of people in with whom I interact. And people who are socially isolated may have very, very few people with whom they have any kind of an exchange. So we're particularly worried about people who are socially isolated during this pandemic, because social isolation is also considered to be a risk factor for depression as well as suicidal thinking.
Serious work. Are there any special considerations that folks should have when they know an older an adult and they're concerned that the person might be socially isolated or lonely during the pandemic and the holidays?
Well, Dr. Carla Parasanato, who is a geriatrician from UCSF, what she says, it's not enough just to ask, are you living with someone or are you by yourself, as a gauge for loneliness. She said, we have to probe deeper than that. And that's what we try to do through the friendship line, is be able to, you know, really ask these questions in terms of, how many people do you actually talk to during any given day? And the fact that you live with a spouse, as we know, may not necessarily mean they have a very close and loving connection. Or if they're living with adult children, those adult children may not be really there in a caring way. So we have to really, go a little deeper in terms of what is their household, who's in their household, and if they're by themselves, do they have any, real connections? And this goes back to your original question, Flora, about during this pandemic, is that we realize that however people have coped in the old days, pre-COVID, they may not be able to do that now. We know a lot of older people like to go to McDonald's or places like that in the morning to have coffee with friends. Well, they can't do that anymore. And if they are able to do it, they're often very anxious about what if somebody takes their mask off and as they're eating their, sandwich or something. So there's a lot of prohibitions to doing what they used to do, going to the senior center for lunch or exercise. And not everybody has Zoom. Not everybody has a laptop or an iPad that they can use to even have like the connection we're having right here today. A lot of people don't have that. You don't have those resources. And but most people have at least a landline, a telephone. And so that's what Friendship Line has been utilizing for, now soon to be 48 years. Uh, but I just think we have to be very thoughtful about who's carrying the burden of this pandemic. And we know it's the elderly, the frail elderly, the poor, people without shelter, and and we just have to maintain these connections and find, new ways to outreach to people.
And if getting older wasn't difficult enough with all the challenges that you've recognized in our population, certainly the pandemic has added additional complex layers. So thank you for that explanation. It helps me to understand that there is a difference between being alone being lonely and socially isolated. And I hope our viewers enjoy that differentiation as well. The it's really good advice that you've given us. And if someone is unsure that their loved one is socially isolated, let me share that AARP Foundation offers a tool, and it's called connect2affect.org, and you can see right there on the screen, that measures the risk of isolation. The platform also provides a list of community resource and assistive programs for medical care, food, and job training. Dr. Board, do you have any tips to determine if a loved one, which maybe isn't very vocal or doesn't like to ask for help, whether they are socially isolated or lonely?
And I think that's really important because one of the things that we are aware of with people again who are lonely and have been so over a long period of time or socially isolated is that instead of like when we offer, when we call out to people and we say, would you like us to call because you've been referred, someone is concerned about you, they'll often say, no, I don't need that call. But it's because they're suspicious, and so what we try to say to them is, you know, I anticipate that you might say no to this offer, uh, and that's okay, and we'll try you again tomorrow to see if you change your mind. So don't give up on people, but you have to realize that if people have been isolated for a long time, that's going to affect how they think, and they're going to be suspicious, and they're going to wonder, why are you calling me? You know. Um, and they're not going to be rejoicing necessarily that they're going to be getting a phone call. They might be afraid. So you just have to hang in there with them and keep that in mind.
And considering the number of robocalls we all get these days, that you may need to call them 2 or 3 times because the first couple of times they're going to ignore that unknown phone number. So that's quite a challenge. Now, we've heard often enough, especially in these times, to reach out to our neighbors, to call a friend, but sometimes it feels awkward. So, do you have any tips for those of us that are calling or reaching out to our neighbors to make sure that they're not isolated, that they're not lonely, to make it feel less awkward for us?
Yeah, well, I think it is very challenging to reach out to people who are very, very isolated because and lonely, because I think that's the big dread of our time is that we fear that inside of ourselves. We don't want to be lonely. We don't want to be isolated. That's we and if you've had any experiences in your life uh, where you have been lonely, even for like a weekend or a couple weeks when you might have been traveling and just were by yourself. It's something we fear as humans because as human creatures, we're hardwired to affiliate with other people. It's part of our DNA. And so when we reach out to people who are lonely and who are suffering in that loneliness, because loneliness isn't all that they're experiencing, it may also be anxiety, it may also be fear, it might also be the stress of living alone. Um, so it is challenging for us to reach out. It's challenging to say to somebody who's very lonely, you know, um, I'm here with you. I want to support you. That's all we have to say, but we have to identify our own fears first, and we have to make sure that we are connected to other people because I think I know with our volunteers and our staff, and I know for myself, I talk to people all day long, and I'm aware that, you know, at the end of the day, I have to really apply some self care to myself because it's hard, I feel for people, my heart breaks for people. Um, and they keep saying, when is this pandemic going to end? You know, when are we going to get to normal? And as we know, normal might not be the way it looked in December of 2019. Um, it's very challenging, but I really encourage people who want to do this work and connect with their neighbor or whoever. Is just make sure you apply self care.
Very good point. That reaching out becomes so critical, especially in this day and age where our only communication is as we're experiencing now. So let me thank you for those suggestions. And again, for those of you who are just joining us on the live stream, my name is Flora House. I am with AARP California, and today we have as our special guest Dr. Patrick Arbore, and he is the founder and director of the Center for Elderly Suicide Prevention and Grief-Related Services at the Institute on Aging in San Francisco, and the founder of the Friendship Line to discuss how to combat social isolation and loneliness during these very difficult times, as well as available resources. If you have questions for Dr. Arbore, please put them in the comments. Now, you talk about self-care. So, Dr. Arbore, can you give us some tips and things that we can do for our own mental well-being? And as you mentioned, what are some of the things you do for yourself? So, thank you for making it one-on-one for us.
Well, what's really important, and especially for those of us who have been working from home, where our office is now our home, there's no distinction anymore between, you know, office as a place where we go, and home is where we come to unwind. And so I really mm, have a lot of empathy for people like myself who are working from home, and we know, thousands of people are doing this now. Uh, and the other thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is make sure that you're getting rest, proper rest. Because the thing about those of us who are living alone, especially with the holidays coming, um, that there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of our own sadness about, making our connections, with our families or whoever. And I think we have to really be sure that we have our own people that we can talk and be authentic with. Because when we're talking to people who are lonely and isolated, we have to really be there for them, and we have to hold that space of suffering with them. We have to accompany them into their sadness or into their feelings of grief that they're not going to be with family members, they're not going to be able to be with grandchildren. Um, in a way that we did in 2019. Um, but when we finish those calls and we're sitting and reflecting on what's going on, we want to make sure that we are able to connect with other people where we can be authentic and we can say, what does it feel like for me? What I fear is that people in aging, um, do our work with older people or younger disabled, and we don't seek other people where we can share our own loneliness, our own sadness, and I think it's so important for self-care that we tell the emotional truth.
That authenticity that you speak of resonates very strongly for me. So thank you very much for that. Where can folks go to learn additional resources if they're feeling down or lonely?
I didn't catch that.
Okay, where can folks go to learn more about additional resources if they're feeling lonely or depressed?
Well, and I think that's a really good question because, again, so many of the people I talk to, whether it's on the friendship line or, the population of grief individuals that I speak to, is that most of them describe the symptoms of depression, uh, but they have never been diagnosed. They haven't ever been treated. And again, it goes back to this thing of, ageism, uh, that they've kind of internalized these ageist attitudes, and they'll just say, "Well, this is just what it's like to be old," and uh, and I think we have to be very sensitive, uh, because mental health has a stigma, and nobody wants to admit that they're feeling depressed, and that depression is a mental health issue. And so we have to be very thoughtful about that. And it's so sad to me that people are still mm, talking in a way that says uh, suffering is part of being old, and uh, and that just makes me crazy. And that's why I'm so grateful when older people volunteer on our friendship line, because I'm going to be 73 in December, and getting older isn't about going down some rabbit hole. That I really firmly believe that we are better as we get older if we take care of ourselves and if we can model that for other people.
That ageism you speak of, I felt it myself as I did some nursing research. I used to believe that as we aged, depression was normal. And then I became an older adult and learned, no, it's not. So we've got a few questions now that would have come in from our viewers, and I'd like to share one of them with you. The question is the friendship line only for older adults, or can anyone call in? And is it free?
Certainly, that's a really good question too. The friendship line is available for um, any older adult, um, and it is free. Absolutely, we have been this way since 1973. Um, so we are there for any older person, and the important thing too, Flora, is that one doesn't have to be in a crisis. We are an accredited crisis intervention hotline, but our strength is our warm line, because what we want is for people not to get into a crisis. We don't want them to struggle emotionally. And so what we try to do, and we've been doing this since 1973, is to we people can call once a day, every day, to get support. Um, and it's really it's part of our goal to help strengthen people,
And I see that
so
we
one doesn't have to be in a crisis.
And I see that we've brought up that phone number for your center right there in front of everyone. One question I want to go back to a little piece. You talked about volunteers. Are volunteers on the friendship line?
Absolutely. And as so many people had to do, who are working in the field of aging, so many of our business models had to change, and had to change quickly. So we had to leave our call center behind, and work remotely. And even though that was a major transition for volunteers to work remotely, and we are concerned about them as well. We want them not to feel isolated or alone. So we keep in touch with them through Zoom and all these different models. But what we found is a silver lining is that people that wouldn't be able to come to San Francisco to our call center now can still be a volunteer, and we really value that. And if anybody is interested in that, I really strongly support them to follow through with that, because now you can work remotely from home.
One more question has come in from the public that's listening to you. Does the Institute on Aging offer resources or support in other languages?
And yeah, what we always have tried to make sure that we have volunteers who are bilingual, whether it's in Spanish or Tagalog or Cantonese or Mandarin. We can't promise that when an older person who speaks, let's say more fluently in Spanish, is going to on that call get somebody who's bilingual. But all they have to do is let the volunteer know what their number is, and we'll make sure that someone calls them back who can speak in the language in which they feel more comfortable.
Dr. Arbore, I want to thank you very much and appreciate very much you taking the time to talk about a very serious subject, especially not only during the pandemic, but to our population that we serve and at this time of the year. For anyone who joined us late, we had the wonderful opportunity of speaking with Dr. Patrick Arbore, the founder and director of the Center for Elderly Suicide Prevention and Grief-Related Services at the Institute on Aging in San Francisco, and the founder of the Friendship Line, to discuss how to combat social isolation and loneliness during these trying times, as well as available resources. This conversation has been recorded, so if you missed anything, you can go back and watch it again. To learn about free and publicly available AARP resources and other virtual events, please visit aarp.org/coronavirus. Dr. Arbore, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been quite a pleasure speaking with you and learning about different ways to combat social isolation and loneliness. And to our viewers, we hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us for a Facebook Live Webinar Wednesday conversation. Thank you, Dr. Arbore, and good good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Flora. Bye.
Bye.